Terrifying grizzly bear charges at hiker and a dog in Alberta. A peaceful hike through the wilderness of Alberta, Canada, turned into a terrifying fight for survival when a massive 300-kilogram grizzly bear suddenly appeared and confronted a woman walking her dog. The heart-stopping encounter captured on video shows the enormous predator circling the hiker while slowly closing the distance. Now it's time to break down every angle of this story on our AI podcast.
So if a 650-pound predator suddenly charges you out in the wild, I mean, every single fiber of your human DNA is going to scream at you to just turn and run.
Oh, absolutely. The adrenaline dump is instantaneous.
Right. Your biology is just demanding that you flee.
Yeah.
But if you actually listen to that primal instinct in that moment, you're almost certainly going to die.
Yeah, sad but true. It's basically a fatal mistake.
So today we are taking a deep dive into this piece of source material titled Standing Ground, a hiker's defiance in grizzly country. And our mission here isn't just to, recount some scary viral video.
No, we really want to extract the exact survival mechanics from this specific encounter.
Exactly. We're unpacking the expert guidelines from the text so that you, the listener, know exactly how to handle a literal worst-case scenario in the wild.
Because that human fight-or-flight response, it's incredibly powerful, but it evolved for threats that we could either overpower or outrun.
Right, which does not apply to a 300-kilogram grizzly bear.
Not at all. Neither of those options exists. You can't outrun it, and you definitely can't overpower it.
No way. So let's put you directly into this terrifying scenario from the text. You have this woman, and she's just hiking with your dog in Alberta, Canada.
Beautiful area, usually very peaceful.
Yeah, super peaceful, pristine wilderness. And then suddenly the landscape just shifts. A massive grizzly bear just materializes on the trail right in front of them.
Which is terrifying.
Terrifying is an understatement. I mean, we are talking about 300 kilograms of muscle and claws and just absolute intent. To put that in perspective, that is the weight of like a grand piano.
Yeah, or a really large vending machine.
A vending machine with teeth just staring you down. And it doesn't just pass by either. It locks onto the woman and her dog, and it actually begins to circle them.
Slowly closing the distance, right?
Exactly. And her poor dog just completely freezes in terror. But the woman, she refuses to panic. She just locks her knees, stands her ground, and starts shouting commands.
Like, no, and get away.
Yeah. While a literal vending machine with teeth is circling her.
And, that specific decision to just freeze rather than flee, that was her saving grace.
Because running is the absolute worst thing you can do, right?
Oh, without a doubt. The wildlife experts in the text are super clear on this. Running from a grizzly is the ultimate fatal flaw.
Why is that? Like, biologically speaking?
Well, we have to look at what's happening neurologically in the bear. A grizzly's visual processing is highly, highly attuned to horizontal movement.
Okay, so like a tripwire.
Exactly like a mechanical tripwire. It's not even a conscious decision on the bear's part. It's an automatic biological loop.
So if you move fast, you completely bypass the bear's, cognitive evaluation process.
You do. Because when a human turns and runs, your visual profile shifts. You go from being this unknown stationary entity into the unmistakable blur of fleeing prey.
And prey means dinner.
Right. That emotion crosses the bear's visual field and instantly triggers its chase instinct. And the text notes that grizzlies can run at speeds far greater than humans.
So escaping on foot is literally a physical impossibility.
You will not win that race. Ever.
Wow. Okay, so by standing her ground, the hiker is effectively short-circuiting the predator's baseline programming.
That's a great way to put it. The bear approaches, fully expecting the human to act like a vulnerable prey animal to run.
But she doesn't.
No, she remains planted. She braced the script. And by doing that, she forces the bear to stay in a state of cognitive evaluation.
Instead of letting it slip into that purely reactive predatory strike.
Exactly. That circling behavior the text mentions. That is the bear trying to resolve its cognitive dissonance.
Like, what is this thing?
Right. Predators circle to assess vulnerabilities, find a blind spot, just figure out what they're dealing with.
Because she didn't trigger the chase instinct, the bear is forced to study her. But that brings us to the escalation of this whole encounter. Because it gets incredibly messy here.
It really does. It becomes a terrifying test of nerves.
Yeah, because she didn't run. The bear doesn't just leave. The standoff intensifies. The woman realizes the bear is still analyzing them, still threatening to close that final gap.
That pressure is mounting.
So she starts yelling those commands, no, and all that. But then, and this is where it gets crazy, she takes it a step further. She starts making these loud, highly unusual, animal-like sounds.
Trying to intimidate it.
Right, trying to intimidate a 300-kilogram predator. And the bear actually responds to this bizarre display by launching a frightening charge right at them.
Which is a classic pressure testing tactic for a bear.
It rushes forward just to see if she's bluffing.
Exactly. It rushes to see if the sudden burst of aggressive noise is fake, and that charge forces the dog to finally break its freeze and retreat.
And then the grizzly escalates it even further. It rises completely up onto its hind legs.
Which is just an enormous display of size and strength.
I can't even imagine. It's claiming all that vertical airspace.
Yeah.
Just a wall of fur and muscle. But then, incredibly, after all that, the bear ultimately loses interest.
It just drops down.
Drops down, retreats behind a nearby gate, and just lets the woman and her dog escape uninjured.
It really is an unbelievable outcome.
It is. But I have to push back on something here because looking at the source text, her survival honestly feels like a massive fluke.
How so?
Well, her behavior directly contradicts the official guidelines that are laid out later in the very same document.
Yeah. The contradiction is pretty glaring.
Right. I mean, she survived by shouting and making loud, unpredictable animal noises. She was basically screaming at the top of her lungs.
She was.
But the official wildlife guidelines explicitly state that you should absolutely not scream. They say to use a low, steady voice. Did she just survive by breaking the rules?
Well, this really highlights the friction between perfectly executed textbook guidelines and the messy reality of panic.
So it was risky deviation.
A massive gamble. We have to separate the one golden rule she followed from the deviation she took. She followed the non-negotiable baseline. She didn't run.
Kept the tripwire from snapping.
Exactly. But those loud animal-like noises, that was fueled by sheer desperation.
But why is screaming such a big gamble? If it worked for her by making her seem unpredictable, why do the experts explicitly warn against it?
You have to consider vocal frequencies and what they signal to an apex predator. High-pitched screams or frantic yelling closely mimic the sounds of an injured animal.
Oh, wow, like a distressed prey animal.
Precisely. And in the animal kingdom, distress signals vulnerability. So instead of confusing the bear, screaming is highly likely to agitate it.
It reinforces the idea that you are weak.
Right. She was incredibly fortunate that her specific noises disrupted the bear's categorization process, making her seem, too bizarre to attack. But it is not a replicable strategy.
Definitely don't try that at home, folks, or, well, in the woods. So if her screaming was just a desperate gamble that paid off, let's strip that away and focus on the actual biological baseline we're supposed to default to.
The official rule book, essentially.
Yeah, let's look at the do's and don'ts provided by the wildlife authorities in the text.
They are basically a manual for de-escalating a predator's nervous system.
Okay, so what are the do's?
The primary directive is remain calm, stand your ground, and back away slowly, but only when it is possible and safe to do so.
Okay, backing away slowly makes sense. And what about talking?
The text specifically instructs hikers to speak in a firm, controlled, low, and steady voice.
Which completely opposes that human instinct to just yell for help.
It does. But the tone of your voice dictates your perceived placement in the hierarchy of that encounter.
Interesting. How so?
A low, steady register communicates confidence. You're signaling to the bear's auditory processing that you aren't panicked, you aren't injured, and you are not prey.
You're just calmly occupying your space.
Exactly. It bridges that gap between presenting a threat, which yelling might do, and presenting as a victim.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, the guidelines also put a huge emphasis on eye contact, or rather a lack of it. They instruct you to avoid looking directly into the bear's eyes.
Yes, that's crucial.
Which is wild to me, because my instinct would be to lock eyes with the threat so I can anticipate what it's going to do next. Why is looking away safer?
Because unbroken eye contact is a universal language in the animal kingdom. It translates directly to a challenge for dominance.
Oh, so by staring it down, you're basically saying, let's fight.
You are demanding a physical confrontation. But by avoiding direct eye contact, maybe watching its chest or its paws instead, you remove that spatial challenge.
You're visually communicating to its amygdala that you're conceding dominance.
Right, while your grounded stance still says, but I'm not something to be hunted.
You are really threading an incredibly tight physiological needle there. You have to be strong enough not to be prey, but submissive enough not to be a rival.
It requires total, absolute control over your own physical output.
And that control extends to the don'ts, the fatal mistakes. The text says, do not turn your back, do not run, and do not make sudden movements.
Standard rules, yeah.
But there is one specific sudden movement they highlight that I found fascinating. They explicitly warn hikers against attempting to climb a tree.
Ah, yes. The tree climbing instinct.
Right, because to a panicked human, a tree looks like the ultimate escape hatch. It gets you off the ground, away from the teeth.
It is a deeply ingrained human urge to seek high ground when threatened.
So why is it so dangerous? Is it just because people underestimate how fast bears can climb? Or is something deeper happening visually?
It all comes back to that mechanical tripwire we talked about earlier. Yes, grizzlies can easily pull a human out of the lower branches.
Right.
But the immediate fatal trigger is the visual optic of the climb itself. Think about what climbing a tree actually looks like from the bear's perspective.
It's just a sudden burst of frantic energy, right?
Exactly. Your limbs are scrambling, your back is exposed to the predator, and your movement is rapid and evasive.
You are perfectly mimicking a terrified prey animal trying to escape.
Precisely. That sudden, frantic upward movement completely shatters the illusion of the calm, non-threatening entity you're trying to project.
So the bear's visual cortex processes that rapid scramble exactly the same way it processes you sprinting down the trail.
The chase instinct activates instantly. You are literally inviting the predator to pursue you in an environment where it still has a massive physical advantage.
Man, the psychological discipline required to survive this is just staggering. Every single mechanic the experts outline requires you to betray your own body's alarm bells.
It really does.
You can't run, you can't climb away, you can't scream. You just have to stand rooted in the dirt and be the most uninteresting, steady presence possible while a 300-kilogram wall of muscle decides your fate.
Which is exactly why internalizing the why behind these rules is the only way to actually execute them.
Because if you just memorize a list, panic will wipe it out.
Exactly. But if you deeply understand that sudden movement physically forces the bear to attack you, you can use that logic to literally anchor your feet to the ground.
That is so powerful. Of course, mastering these mechanics is only necessary if you fail at the ultimate objective, right?
Yeah.
Which is never encountering the bear in the first place.
Prevention is always the best survival tactic.
And the source text really shifts focus to this in the post-incident response from Alberta Parks officials. They state that visitor safety is their highest priority. They continue to monitor the area, but their core advice demands that hikers change how they move through the woods.
Yeah, prevention is about manipulating the environment before the predator is even anywhere near your vicinity.
So what are their specific guidelines for that?
Well, they suggest traveling in groups and making regular noise while you hike.
Which,
Yeah.
seems so counterintuitive to people who go into nature for peace and quiet.
Sure, nobody wants to ruin the serenity.
But the mechanics behind it are simple. You are removing the element of surprise. Bears have incredibly sensitive hearing, and generally they want absolutely nothing to do with humans.
Right. A startled bear is a defensive, dangerous bear.
So if you're just moving silently through dense brush,
You risk breaching a bear's critical space before it has time to process that you're even there.
so by projecting conversation or clapping or just making consistent noise, you're giving its nervous system time to detect you.
You give it time to categorize you as a human and just quietly vacate the area long before you ever cross paths.
Makes total sense.
Mm.
The guidelines also stress keeping dogs on a leash, which ties directly back to this specific encounter in the text.
Well, absolutely.
Because the woman's dog froze, but an unleashed dog will often detect a bear, run forward to investigate, and then instantly realize it is completely outmatched.
And what does the dog do? Its survival instinct kicks in, it flees in terror, and it runs straight back to its owner for protection.
Bringing an agitated, charging grizzly directly to the hiker.
You are essentially sending a heat-seeking missile out into the brush that returns with a predator attached to it.
That is a terrifying image, but so true. So a leash is basically a mechanical preventative measure against your pet initiating a biological conflict you cannot win.
Exactly. Keep the dog on a leash.
But prevention isn't just about how you broadcast your own presence, right? It's also about actively reading the environment. Like reading a crime scene before the crime happens.
I like that analogy. You have to look for the specific evidence the bear left behind before you actually see the bear.
The text explicitly tells hikers to watch for fresh digging, animal tracks, overturned logs, and bear scat. And it's easy to treat that as just a basic checklist, but we need to analyze what those clues actually mean.
They represent a timeline of the bear's behavior. You have to shift from being just a passive consumer of scenery to an active analyst of the terrain.
Let's take overturned logs and fresh digging, for example. When you see a massive log flipped over on the side of the trail, that doesn't just mean a bear walked by.
No, it means you have entered a foraging zone.
It reveals the bear's immediate caloric focus.
Right. A grizzly overturns logs and digs up the earth to access insects, grubs, root systems.
So if that digging is fresh,
It means the bear is likely nearby, with its head down, entirely focused on consuming food. Its sensory awareness might actually be lowered because it is so distracted by eating.
which means the risk of you accidentally startling the animal is exponentially higher.
Exactly. Interrupting a 300-kilogram predator while it is actively feeding is a recipe for a defensive strike.
And the tracks and the scat serve the exact same purpose, right? They're temporal markers.
They tell you exactly how close you are treading to the animal's current location.
You are reading the trail to ensure you don't literally walk into a dining room unannounced.
That's it exactly. When you synthesize all of these prevention tactics, making noise, controlling your pets, analyzing the terrain, you're establishing a perimeter of safety based on the animal's own biological habits.
It all comes down to respect for the mechanics of the wild. So, to briefly summarize the core directives we've extracted today. If you're in grizzly country, you must read the environmental clues
Look for the digging, respect the tracks.
and announce your presence. But if prevention fails and you find yourself locked in a sudden standoff, your survival depends entirely on de-escalation.
Maintain a low, steady voice. Avoid direct eye contact. Back away slowly.
Do not turn your back. Do not scramble up a tree. And above all else, whatever you do not run. You cannot outrun the mechanical tripwire of a predator's chase instinct.
The overarching lesson here is that wilderness survival relies on intelligence, not physical dominance. You can't overpower the environment, but you can understand its rules well enough to navigate it safely.
Beautifully said. Which actually leads me to a final, somewhat provocative thought that I want to leave you, the listener, to mull over as we close out this deep dive.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
Well, throughout this whole analysis, we've discussed the bear's biological programming, right?
Mhm.
How motion triggers the chase, how high-pitched noises signal prey, how eye contact signals a challenge.
Right.
The grizzly bear isn't attacking out of malice. It doesn't have an evil agenda. It is simply executing millions of years of evolutionary code.
The animal is entirely a prisoner to its own biology.
But, so are we. When faced with a 660-pound predator, our biology screams at us to flee, to climb, to panic. Therefore, surviving that encounter isn't truly about battling the bear at all.
It's a battle against yourself.
Exactly. You have to use your rational mind to completely override your deepest, most primal natural instincts. You have to lock your knees when every single cell in your body is telling you to run.
That's a profound way to look at it.
It really makes you wonder, how many other areas in your life require you to completely suppress your deepest natural instincts just to survive?
Okay, one question for you. Should dogs be allowed off leash in areas where grizzly bears are known to live? Or do you think keeping pets leashed could reduce dangerous encounters like this one? Share your thoughts and reasons. Thanks.